in this problem, we are writing this remove members method, so part B, and it does two things. First of all, it returns a list of all students who have graduated and are in good standing, and we're determining someone who has graduated is if the member's graduation year is less than or equal to the method's year parameter, and we return an empty list if no members meet that criteria. And then the second thing that it does is it removes from the member list all members who have graduated regardless of whether or not they are in good standing. So let's go ahead and get started with the pseudocode so we kind of know what direction we're going with. First, remember that we want to at some point return an array list. The array list that we're going to be returning from remove members is going to be separate than our member list, because from our member list we're removing members who have graduated, but then we want to return this list of students who have graduated and are in good standing. So there's two separate lists that are being modified at the same time. We want to first create a new array list to store all the members who have graduated and are in good standing. Okay. Then what we want to do is we want to loop over member list and remove any students who have graduated. Loop over member list and remove any students who have graduated. And as mentioned before, we're determining a student who has graduated if their grad year is less than or equal to this year parameter we're passing in. Determine if a student has graduated, remove them from the member list. If so, then we also want to determine if they are in good standing and add them to the new array list if the prior two conditions are true. Remember that the student has to be both graduated and in good standing to be added to this new array list that we're going to be returning. And then, remember we created this array list, we're going to want to return it. So return the array list containing the students who are graduated plus in good standing. And that's about it for our pseudocode. So let's go ahead and jump into the actual code. Create a new array list to store all the members who have graduated and are in good standing. So remember, we want to initialize an array list like this. So let's call this graduated good standing equals new array list. Remember, an array list is an object, and we also want to pass in the type of our array list. And since the type of the return is array list of member info, that's probably what we want to create as well. And then don't forget these parentheses at the end. We want to initialize this object. All right, so we've created this array list. Make sure you have the second part of your statement. So here we're creating this new array list variable, and then here we're initializing it as an array list of type member info. So in case we loop through the member list and we don't actually find any students who have both graduated and are in good standing, we still can return this empty array list instead of just a variable that hasn't been initialized. Okay? So loop over member list, remove any students who have graduated. Here's where things get a little bit interesting. Typically, when we loop through something, we loop through it starting at index 0, or the first element in our list, and then we loop until we reach the end of the array list. However, in this problem, we are removing things from our array list. So that might be a little bit tricky if we start at the first index and we keep going until the end. What we might want to do instead here is to start at the end of the array list and loop backwards until we reach the first element in the array list. The reason for this is our indices are going to be changing as we move. Let's say the last student in our array list is in good standing and has graduated, and we remove them from the member list. Then we could just move on to the next element in the array list because that element's index will not have changed. Okay, so for int I equals, so here typically we would say 0. Now we want to start at the last element of our array, so that would be member list dot and it's size here, not length with arrays, so size. And then remember that this returns the size, but since array lists are 0 index, we want to do -1. We want to keep going as long as it is greater than or equal to 0. Once we hit -1, that's no longer a valid index in our array list, so we know we can stop. And then instead of doing I++ here, we're going to be doing I minus. Okay, we're iterating through this backwards. All right, so now we need to determine two separate things. Determine if the student has graduated. Okay, first I might actually grab the member info at that index in the array list. So member info current equals member list dot get at I. Okay, so now we're looking at a member info object, and remember we have these functions up at the top within our member info class that we can use to get the information we want here. If the student has graduated, we would want to do int grad year equals current dot, and then let's see any methods that work. Okay, dot get grad year looks great. Grad year, and remember the criteria for if they have graduated is if the member's graduation year is less than or equal to the method's year parameter. So if grad year is less than or equal to year, that means that we've found a student that has graduated and we want to remove them from the member list. So we can go to that handy dandy reference sheet and check out the array list methods. It's always a good idea to check these out to make sure you are actually using the proper methods, because they will dock you points if you don't. And honestly, sometimes it's a little bit hard for me to remember which methods you need to use because they're all named very similarly, but they're sometimes different. So in this case, we want to use the remove method. So we say member list dot remove, and then we pass in the index of the element that we want to remove, and then it will adjust the position of all of the elements ahead of it in that list. We want to remove I, and then remember we need both conditions, both the fact that they're in good standing and they have graduated, in order for them to be added to this new array list. So within that same if statement, we also want to determine if they are in good standing. So boolean in good standing equals current dot, let's see if there are any methods in our member info. In good standing looks like a great candidate, so in good standing. And then since this returns a boolean, we can just do if in good standing. We want to add them to that array list. You might be tempted to do something like this, if in good standing equals true. This itself is either going to be true or false, so this is sort of a redundant comparison, so we can just get rid of that there. If the student is in good standing and they've also graduated, we want to add them to this new graduated good standing array list we've created. So graduated good standing, and then we've got this add method. It'll add it to the end of the list. In this case, since there's nothing inside of our list, it'll be the first element inside of our list, so we can just add whatever object we want to add into the array list, and in this case it would be current. Okay, so now we've gotten all the logic inside of our loop. Now what we want to do is return that array list that we've created of students that have graduated and are in good standing. So return graduated good standing. And that should be it for our code. As always, please, if there's one thing you can take from my videos, please test your code. You can be so confident and then not notice you messed up one little thing and you'll get docked points. But if you test your code, you can be more certain about it. But anyway, okay, let's go ahead and test our code. So we've got this array list, and the year we have is 2018. We create this new array list, so at this point it's empty. There's no students inside of it because we haven't looped through all of the students in the member list yet. So we have I is equal to member list.size -1. So that would be 4 minus 1 is 3. I is greater than or equal to 0. That is true. So go inside of our for loop. We start at the back of the list, at the third index. So that would be Garcia Maria. who graduated in 2020, and she is in good standing, so we want to get her grad year, which would be 2020. Then we need to see, is the grad year yet less than or equal to 2018? No, it is not, so we do not remove them from the member list, and we don't actually even need to do the rest of this logic because we've determined that the student has not graduated, so we can anticipate that Maria Garcia will still be in the member list after remove members has been called. And if you look at the example, it is true. But let's go ahead with the rest of the member list before we get ahead of ourselves. So we decrement I is now 2, 2 is still greater than or equal to 0, so we get the next member, which is Michael, graduated 2017, and he is not in good standing. So his grad year is 2017. Is 2017 less than or equal to 2018? That is true, so we will be removing them from our member list. Michael is gone from the member list. We need to see if they're in good standing. Well, unfortunately they're not, so we won't be adding them to the graduated good standing array list. And then we move on. Now that we've removed Michael from our array list, you'll notice that the next element we'll look at, it doesn't matter that Michael is no longer in the array list because we're still looking at the same element that we want to look at, right? It would only matter if we were going through our array list in order, but we weren't. We decrement I again. 1 is greater than or equal to 0, so we continue. So the next student we're looking at is Steve. Graduated in 2018, and he is in good standing. So our grad year is 2018. Is 2018 less than or equal to 2018? That is true. So it looks like we'll be removing them from the member list as well. Are they in good standing? Steve is in good standing. So actually we'll be adding him to the graduated good standing list as well, which now has Fox Steve in it. This is like an object containing, this plus his grad year and good standing, etc., etc. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to include his name. Cool. We've looked at 3 out of the 4 students. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the last student. How do I know this is the last student? Well, our index is 0. 0 is greater than or equal to 0, but that will be the last index at which that will be true. So this will be our last student, Jane. Graduated in 2019 and is not in good standing, so her grad year, 2019, is 2019 less than or equal to 2018? That's false, so we don't remove them from the member list, we don't check if they're in good standing, we don't add them to the graduated good standing list. We ended up removing Michael and Steve, so now our array list, our member list will only have Jane and Maria in it, and we only had one student who was both graduated and in good standing, which was Steve. So when we return this graduated good standing array list, it will only contain Steve inside of it. So if we get rid of all the pseudocode, here is what our remove members method looks like. We create that new array list that we're going to be returning. We iterate through the member list backwards. We get the member at each index. We get their grad year. We compare that to the parameter. If they graduated, then we remove them from the member list. We see if they're in good standing. If they're in good standing and they graduated, we add them to that array list that we return. Let me know if you have any questions. And as always, have an awesome day.